Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Sober Stories. I am Rose Romain, a wellbeing, mental health, and recovery coach, and I am delighted to welcome Will Kirby, aka Santero, to Sober Stories. Will is an East London DJ who has been DJing for 2 decades now. Will has represented in the UK in the world final of the Red Bull Freestyle, was a resident at the legendary Ministry of Sound, and played sets globally from Bali to Berlin, including warming up the main stage of Global Gathering for The Prodigy. He has also played alongside artists such as Van Helden, Annie Mac, Basement Jaxx, Sugar Hill Gang, Jazzy Jeff, and Grandmaster Flash. Thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
So let's jump in and start talking about recovery and your sober journey. How do you define your recovery? Do you have like a day, week, year count you keep tally of?
I do actually. Ever since I started I quite like to keeping an eye on these sorts of things. And so today is day 981. Woo! So yeah, it's
how many years? 3.5?
Nearly. It'll be 3 in May.
Oh my God, amazing.
I have an app that I use called Time Until or something. And basically early on, I quite like counting like the minutes or the seconds or the hours or whatever. So when you get to 10,000 hours, there was like a jokey thing of, oh, I'm now an expert in sobriety, the whole, that kind of thing. Because it was always nice to have a target to aim for. Yeah. To kind of keep me like that. And so obviously the next big one is 1,000. So I'm planning out what sort of takeaway I'm going to order or whatever. I don't know. But,
I love that. And I know nothing about your story in terms of how you came to find recovery or sobriety. Is that how you define it, sobriety or recovery?
Yeah, sobriety. I've never really thought of it as recovery because I've never been through any programs or 12-step things or anything like that. It's one of those things I've kind of done it off my own back, but it was definitely something that it rattled around my brain for a long time before I actually did it. I was going through quite a deep depression period in my life, about 2015 or so. I remember calling a hotline thinking that they'll just send me to a therapist or give me some Prozac or that'll sort me out. And they'd sent me to an alcohol place. And I was just like, well, why are you sending me here? And went to one of the things with the guy, sat there the whole time going, yeah, whatever. And then never went back again. And looking back now, that was just exactly where I needed to be because I'm never sure whether because I actually gave up quite easily when I did. I'm never sure whether I was an alcoholic or am an alcoholic, but I'm totally comfortable to just assume that I was and that I am because I'm a lot better off being sober.
Amazing. Yeah. And often like that idea of I need to figure out exactly what I am and why I was. I mean, what happens when you get there? You're like, oh, great, I know. Like the solution is still the same. I'm not fucking drinking. Like It wasn't helping my life. It was actively working against
exactly
me being the person that I wanted to be. So what was the catalyst for you getting there? Can you tell me a bit about what it looks like going up to when you started your sober journey?
I think I'd done maybe 4 or 5 sober Octobers in the years leading up to it. And I'd quite often done dry January. So there'd always been a part of me that was like, I drink a lot. I should have this time off. And I remember I always used to sort of jokingly be like, because then that's just me proving to myself that I could give up if I wanted to. And then of course, at like 1 minute past midnight on the 1st of November, I'd be there with a tequila and a gin and tonic, like, yes, got through sober October, right. And so, the actual catalyst for this particular thing was very like I basically got stood up for a date and was so annoyed that I was with a friend at the time. I was like, and we just got bang on it. And then at about 5 a.m. He ran a pub and we were just there and it was just been a crazy night. And there was just, I think maybe it was the next day. It was just like, what was all that about? I'm so out of control of my own choices that somebody else letting me down in not that unpredictable a way. It was just, it was a bit of a weird relationship I had going on at the time. And I just was like, there's a quote I really that used to rattle around my head a lot back then. I think it's Epictetus. No man is free who is not master of himself. And I just realized that I wasn't in control of my choices there. I was just reacting to a thing and getting completely blotto to try and not think about the thing. And so I decided to stop drinking then. But what's interesting is that when I got to a year, I looked back at because I kept a journal, fortunately, and I do keep a journal. And I read back and I'd sort of persuaded myself in my memories that I had just given up drink, and that was it. And I stopped drinking then. And actually, on the day that I quit drinking, I'd written all this stuff about like maybe just drink at weekends or only at special occasions. And I had all these different rationalizations of how can I navigate this? Like, and it was like, maybe not drink, or maybe I only drink beer, or like all the different things you play around with. So actually for the first month or two, there didn't seem to be any real intention that this was a permanent thing. And then that just sort of evolved over time. And so, yeah, the initial leap wasn't really a leap. I just kind of dipped my toes in the water in a very, I think, in fact, you know what? I said, I'm not going to drink until my friend's 40th birthday, which I then obviously didn't drink at. And he was totally fine with that. He didn't care. He was like, as long as you're there, that's the main thing. So actually that first bit that got me on this journey where I now am completely comfortably sober was me just sort of thinking, I'll have a few weeks off because that last night wasn't cool. I shouldn't do that again. I'll work out a way where I can control this.
And then you were like, it didn't work. The control didn't work. So
yeah, well, I think I had enough experience of how it goes and enough self-knowledge. Like I said, keep a journal and have them for quite a while. And also I read quite a lot around different sort of self-help type and motivation type things. And one of the things that keeps coming up is just honesty. And I could tell myself, sure, just go out and only have 2 drinks. But I have seen that play out enough hundreds of times to know that won't work. And I just had to be honest with myself and just like, well, if I want to have the life I think I'm capable of having and that I want to have, I can't be hungover 4 or 5 times a week and then unable to function for most of the day until I get up and, yeah, it's an interesting one because it was kind of a piecemeal thing that happened over the course of a few weeks and months.
And I really think that that's so brilliant that you kept a journal as well. And you noted that down. Is that something you would recommend to somebody if they were starting out or wanting to question their relationship with alcohol? Did you find that really helped you kind of pull the veil off in a way?
Definitely. The thing with the journal is that it forces you to compose and form your thoughts, because thoughts rattle around in your brain. You sort of understand them, but they can be quite abstract and vague and a little bit ethereal. And then when it's like when you speak to someone, is basically essentially you're speaking to yourself through your journal. And if you're genuinely honest with yourself, it forces you to crystallize your thoughts in a way that makes actual sense, that someone could read them and know what you're thinking. And it's very easy to think, oh, I'm thinking about things, I'm ruminating on things, and never actually really fully understand them. Whereas if you have a conversation or if you write them down, you're forced to make them comprehensible. And it's quite hard at first because when I first started doing it, you're like, well, what am I supposed to write? And you don't really know. And no one really tells you. But you just kind of get, and some days my journal is basically just kind of a list of what I did. Other days it's a real examination of like, I got into an argument with my girlfriend. What was that all about?
Yeah.
And kind of really unraveling that. And so it can be, if you do it really openly and honestly and just assume that you're the only person that will ever read this, it can be kind of a form of free therapy because you're really examining and going through what you think, why you think it, how you can better that. And yeah.
Fantastic. And what is it about honesty? I mean, I hear it a lot, and especially through the kind of way I got sober, like honesty is key. Honesty is the one thing that you need to get sober. Honesty and willingness and an open mind is generally, we see parts of ourselves, right, that come up and we're like, oh, I don't like that. But if we manage to keep an open mind and sort of work through it, generally we kind of get there eventually if we're patient with ourselves. But why do you think honesty is one of those key kind of cornerstones that we can't do without?
I guess because if you're not being honest, then you're not actually tackling the problems. You're tackling imagined problems, or you're maybe hiding those problems. And it honestly doesn't always have to be about the negative things. It's the thing of being honest about what did I do that was good today. And so that's one of the other things I do within my journals is have like gratitude lists and write down things that I did that were good. And so, because obviously one of the things that is very common amongst people is be their own worst critic and be more critical of themselves than they ever would be of a friend.
Right.
And so part of that honesty is giving yourself a break, being kind to yourself. And so, yeah, there's the one side of it is that you have to be honest about what your problems are. And then you have to be honest about the progress you've made and the things you've done and the benefits you're seeing from whatever you're doing. And so it's just basically seeing the world as it is rather than as you wish it was.
Totally. And having a balanced view of that by encompassing the positive as well as the negative. And I love this thing about gratitude. I was talking to somebody earlier today about it, that it doesn't mean you're necessarily happy, but it's a tool that helps you cultivate fulfillment within yourself. So you recognize change. And I often use gratitude. I do a gratitude list every day as a tool to help me cultivate a kind of healthier narrative of what's come before, rather than it's really easy. I could really sit down and write an anti-gratitude list about myself and give it to you in 5 seconds. Do you know what I mean? And so like forcing my brain to do that switch, and at nighttime, so hopefully it percolates in my subconscious somewhere, you know.
Well, I think it's one of those things that the however you want to phrase it, but like I've read the chimp paradox. So you've got the human mind and the chimp mind, and a part of our survival strategy is that we do fixate on the negative and the bad things that happen, and it makes total sense to do that in an environment where a tiger might come around the corner and eat. So you worry about things in a way that isn't necessarily useful in the modern world so much. And so it is, if something bad happens, we tend to ruminate on that way more than the 20 nice things that happen through the day. And one of the things that I've learned about with doing gratitude lists and that kind of thing is that you're essentially training your mind to spot the good. Nice. So the more I would do it, the more I would notice that, oh, that's a nice thing that can go on the gratitude list later. So things that might have just sort of washed past me as I'm walking down the street, I'd be like, and the little things in life that make you smile, then you move on. Nice. And it can be like, oh, I saw something, whatever, it's something in nature, something, or a nice thing happening with some people or whatever. You basically just train your brain to spot the good.
Totally. We're creating those kind of like neural pathways to form new habits. Absolutely. I love that. I absolutely love that. So can you talk a little bit about the impact of substance abuse and drinking on your mental health?
So like this was one of the more interesting things I found about getting sober. And it's weird because I didn't really notice it when I did a month off for those various different things. So maybe it only kicked in a little bit later. But I'd kind of gone through my entire, basically like from my mid-teens to 39, just used to life being a complete roller coaster with some pretty deep depressions, a couple of times getting quite close to suicide. And that just sort of melted away at some point after I got sober in, I guess it was 2018. And I just remember one day thinking, I haven't thought about suicide for I don't know how long. And because it was one of those things where it wasn't like I would really seriously think about how, where would I procure a rope from, or like on a daily basis. But there would just be this kind of like vague notion of suicide would float through my brains at different points in my life, quite often, like basically more or less daily. It would be a thing that I would think about. And realizing that had gone away was just quite a big moment. And it was just this thing of like, well, when did that all start? Oh, that all started in my mid-teens. When did I start drinking? Because I basically had convinced myself that because when you drink, you sort of forget your problems for those hours, and you have this sort of, I was generally a very happy drunk, and so I'd be really, really up and be the center of the party and yada yada yada, and but of course, then that comes with the hangovers. And obviously, as life goes on, they get worse and worse and worse, as everyone realizes eventually. And and you get. I found that having that sort of, it's not like ups and downs disappeared from my life. I still have, as I mentioned earlier on, especially in this era of lockdowns and so on, there's still emotional ups and downs. But I'm in a much better place to manage them, and it's a much more even ship that I'm in on this sea that we're all in, and it made a very profound impact on my mental health. And I do find myself now sometimes when I have, I have lots of friends who are party people because of the industry I work in. And when I see a lot of them, obviously I don't know the ins and outs of them, but quite often people complain about issues to do with their mental health. And there's a part of me that's just like, well, try not drinking for 3 months. And I promise you some of that, at the very least, it's not a panacea. It won't fix everything. And there are certain things, obviously, that are much more deep than using substances or alcohol. But quite often, a lot of what people think is their mental health is related to using substances and alcohol too much.
Totally. And just the fact of, I don't know about you, just the thought of a come down or a hangover, it's Is this I mean, that is enough to keep me away. I have enough problems sort of like going, I ate too much sugar yesterday. I'm feeling a little bit off, or I've got coffee jitters or whatever. But the sort of a calm down, or, it has such an impact. Alcohol is a depressant. Coming down off drugs, like your dopamine descending violently.
Yeah.
If you have a tendency, or there is any stuff in there like unresolved trauma, or even not, the most kind of level people in the world, you can feel like you can feel a little shitty on a come down. I don't know anybody who loves a come down. I mean, I loved a peak on a come down, but that was it.
There's no getting away from the fact that the worst depression I ever went through, and closest I came to suicide, was directly linked to an insane party that I had a great time at, and then stayed up till whatever time it was the following day and took this, that, and the other. And that happened at a time when I'd just gone through quite a painful breakup, and girlfriend in my life had to move out, and then that was when I parted company with Ministry of Sound, which was obviously I did it myself, and it was my choice to do that. But then there's all the doubts creeping of like, was this the wrong thing? And so there were all these different things happening in my life, and then I threw in a massive chemical imbalance in my brain, and like, guess what happened? I basically went through probably the worst week of my life, and it was like I took an already volatile situation, an already unhappy mind, made it really, really happy for about 24 hours, and then had to pick up all the smashed glass afterwards. And fortunately got through it, but again, this is the honesty. It's like, I could pretend that, that was just my brain, and there was no other. The big part of it was I went out and pushed my brain in all sorts of directions, and that took me into a place I didn't really want to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a gift you've given to yourself and your circuit, your brain, and your lizard brain, your chimp brain, all of the brains. It's like, thank you. Well, no, we don't have to do this anymore. I love that you're so open and talk so eloquently about suicide. I'm really touched by it, and sadly have lost men in my life who felt like they couldn't talk about suicide, or in a position of, well, I'm sure you can relate, like it's such a taboo subject. And I think especially, I don't want to just, I mean, all the genders have a relationship with it, but I think it's really awesome that you do. What kind of led you to be vocal and use your socials to kind of air this and give platform to this subject?
I think a part of it was the fact that other people weren't doing it. And I remember so around the time that I got sober, my brother and amongst other people were creating a thing called Get Ahead, which is a mental health charity. And I just remember having a conversation with him. I think it was after I'd written something, and he was like, "Oh, it's really great that you spoke about this." And I was kind of, I remember saying something along the lines of, "Well, if I don't, who will?" And sometimes as well, I've done these things a little impulsively, because it's like, well, I should do this, and then it's out there, and then people have commented and replied, and I'm a bit like, oh, I really wish I hadn't put that out there. But it's actually been a net positive. So I think part of it was just a sense of like, someone's got to do this. It's part of me facing that part of my life. I can't shy away from it because it's out there. People know about it, and that's good for me as well.
Yeah. It's like, I don't get the privilege to hide behind this. Like, you have a platform, and you're being public with it. It's super brave, but there is some kind of like, do I really want to be speaking about my mental health so vividly in such a public space? But I commend you for doing so.
I think part of the worry for me was that I don't like the idea of being defined by a thing, like one facet of my life. So I would not want to be like the sober guy, or the guy who was suicidal, or just like because I don't like it when people just think of me as like a DJ. And it's like, there's a bunch of other things I'm interested in, and I'm, so I think that's part of possibly why people are a bit reluctant, is that they think that that thing will define them. Obviously, there's a certain amount of stigma around these things as well, and there's the whole thing about men not wanting to be weak. But part of it is that it's such a big thing that people worry about it, and so the more people that talk about it, the less stigma there is around it, because it's something that you can be open about because other people before you have been.
And also like this misdefinition of weak strength, like what does that really mean? What does being strong, I heard it misused so many times. Oh, she's really strong, she keeps it together, or he's really tough because he doesn't show how he feels. And I'm like, actually, when I see, I'm very fortunate to grow up with a father who's deeply emotional, cried at the drop of the hat, and was always talking about his feelings. Like, what a privilege, But I now recognize within men as that being a strength, And I think it's really powerful to see. You think, well, you're more kind of multifaceted and defined if you're comfortable in that space talking about those demons, because we all bloody have them. This idea that mental health is something that you can opt in or out of, or depression or suicide or alcoholism or addiction, whether you define it as such, a substance use disorder is a choice, is just bonkers. It's just like distributed. There is no why or,
Brené Brown's really good on this stuff like vulnerability is courage, and we see vulnerability in others and admire it, and then feel like it would be a weakness or something to be shamed about in ourselves. But of course, it's that thing I mentioned earlier on of like, if somebody else is vulnerable in front of us, we don't think that they've embarrassed themselves or anything. We're glad that they felt they could open up to us, and it's a really interesting thing how we worry so much about being vulnerable. I follow NFL, American football, quite closely, and there's I think there's a player in there who started a charity to do with suicide because one of his siblings committed suicide, and it's really interesting seeing all these like hulking, I don't know, like 30-stone guys in armor who then talk to each other on the sidelines about this stuff, and they have microphones everywhere, and you can hear them just being like really admire what you're doing. I think it's amazing, and like people admire that sort of courage to speak openly about very emotional issues.
100%. I'm like welling up as you're talking about that. It's such a beautiful image and such a dichotomy and such a misunderstood subject, men's mental health. So going back to kind of friends and party groups and peers, did you find you felt supported when you kind of made a choice to go sober, or did things change after a shift?
I think I've been quite lucky. Part of that, I suspect, is a function of my age, because I'm 39. Most of my friends are, a few years either side of that. So that's probably the thing, because most of the resistance I've received in terms of like, oh, you're not drinking, boring, that kind of thing, there's maybe been like half a dozen people, maybe a little bit more now, who've been like that. And it's always been the 21-year-old barman or the 19-year-old like glass collector or something, who they can't comprehend going out and not getting wasted. So the fact that I won't do a shot with them is just incomprehensible to them, because this is free alcohol. Why would you not drink it?
What's wrong with you?
And there's been a couple of people a little bit close to my age who've said things where it's a bit like, and in those instances, it's just kind of a signal that, you know what, maybe we were just enablers rather than friends. If you are going to say stuff like that in the knowledge of the fact that, I am trying to not drink ever again, and you're saying stuff that is clearly designed to make me feel bad about that, those people I've just allowed to melt out of my life, because the true friends have just been like, okay, you don't drink, well, that's fine. I'll go out for dinner with those people. And then the way those nights would usually go is that then we go to a cocktail bar, and usually I'll just bounce at that point, go home at 10:30, because I know what direction that night's going to go. And there's no guarantee that finishes when the bar finishes either. So I've found that, my actual genuine friends, it's pretty much not impacted those relationships, other than there are slightly different things we do together now. And like, there are certain points where I'm like, that part of the night's not for me, I'll just head off. And so I'm very close with my family. I've got 3 brothers who I'm very close with, and my parents I speak to most days. So that's been great as well, because they've all been extremely supportive. So yeah.
God, beautiful. I love that. That's great. Fantastic. So you talked about having other interests and not just being a DJ, and could talk about like the energy, because one thing that often comes up is like we have this enormous capacity for energy. If we're not like spending the whole day just being like, how do I get enough liquids inside me to like balance my hydration before I have to go out again or whatever, because we come home at 10:30 and we might just like Netflix or whatever, or wake up early. Like, what do you do with that energy now? Like, where does that?
So yeah, I mean, like that's something really worth mentioning to people, is the extra amount of time per day that I suddenly had.
Yeah.
Like I spent most of my adult life, and obviously that, you know, being a DJ it's slightly different, but like I pretty much didn't get up before late morning and maybe early afternoon, depending on what would happen the night before. And now it's like, you know, I'm up at 8 a.m. every morning, and like I'd say there's probably about an extra 2 or 3 hours per day in my life. Plus, as you say, there's a lot more energy in those hours as well. So, yeah, I mean, I've taken to writing. I mentioned, I think earlier on, that I write for a music blog, and prior to that, I had a food blog that I did just off my own back, just as a thing. I haven't written for that for a little while, but so that was one of the directions that my energy went. And then, yeah, I mean, I'm really into running, and so that's kind of part of my morning routine is basically do you know, various journaling, meditation, breakfast, all that stuff, and then head out for a run. And I do that an awful lot, and that's something I get a lot of. I really think that that's a massively important part of my life, is the exercise. Obviously, you know, there's the physical side of it, but also the mental side of it. If I don't, I actually got injured. Do you know what? Actually, the time that I had that real deep depression coincided with an injury I had in my leg, which meant I couldn't run for 4 or 5 months. And it was before I'd ever really bothered joining a gym or anything. So I just basically didn't exercise it. So, and that is definitely correlated with the place my mind ended up at that point, because I hadn't exercised. And I think that exercise is a really key component of looking after your mental health as well as physical. The one thing I've found I've had to be really careful with, and I've actually got a book up there called Essentialism. I think I got a bit carried away. I think it was maybe 2019, and I was just saying yes to everything. And as a result, I did do a lot of stuff, but I actually let a few people down on a few projects and things like that, where I just bit off more than I could chew. So the thing I found is just, you have so much time and energy compared to what you had before that you just have to marshal your resources a little bit and be realistic about what you do. But it is astonishing how much more I get done in my life than I used to.
Oh my God, I so relate to that. I'm just being like, yes, fuck yes, I could do this.
Yeah.
Like, the morning is no longer terrifying. Although, having said that, though, like, I think it's worth pointing out that you can still stay up till 6 a.m. sober and like sleep till 2 p.m. My husband does that and he loves it. That's just like his life. It's brilliant for him, but it doesn't work for me. Like, I want to be awake for the morning, you know? And so like this extra energy is so, it's brilliant. But then you can totally burn out by just like overcommitting. It's just like, you know.
There's a great diagram in the book, which I can probably explain. It's just like, if you have like 20 arrows pointing that way, and that's the same total distance of energy and effort expended as one arrow just going like that. Yeah. And that's the thing, if you focus all of that energy into 1 or 2 or 3 things, it's just that thing of picking your battles, basically. But
what's that called? Essentialism. I'm so curious.
Essentialism. Hang on 1 second.
Get the book down. Well, I want to have a look at this.
It's by a guy called Greg McKeown. It's that.
Ooh, a disciplined pursuit of less. Oh, I love this shit.
Yeah. There we go. That's the diagram I was on about.
Okay. Oh my God.
So yeah, it's really good. He's got a good, I think I first became aware of him when he was on the Tim Ferriss podcast.
Oh, I love Tim Ferriss.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a really good one.
Nice one. What other podcasts do you listen to?
Oh God.
Clearly you listen to Sober Sex with me and my co-host Louisa.
Yes, I listen to that on a regular basis. I'll have to look that one up though. Music-wise, I listen to Turned On by Ben Gamori and DJ History by Bill Brewster are both really good. Making Sense podcast is really good. Sam Harris. That's got a really interesting scope of topics, from like mindfulness and meditation through to politics. So it's really good. Adam Buxton is the funniest one I listen to, and I'm going to stop there because otherwise I'll just end up using the rest of this time mentioning more. I've just got millions and millions and millions of podcasts. Amazing.
But I do think one of those tools in the recovery toolbox or sober toolbox, whatever you want to call it, is podcasts, right? Like make it, I don't know, I'm just like constantly listening to podcasts. Like, there are so many great recovery podcasts out there. Do you listen to any recovery podcasts apart from Sober Sex?
I actually don't. It's one of those things that I feel weird about this, but getting sober was really strangely easy for me. And I did use, there's a resource I used quite a lot because, do you know Reddit, the website? So their Stop Drinking subreddit. I was on there a lot. I posted quite a lot, and I defaulted my homepage. So when I turned on my computer, that would be where I went. It's something that quite quickly got to a point where my reality was that I wasn't a drinker.
Right.
And it was quite a strange thing that I went from being an incredibly heavy drinker for about 25 years to within a few months of sobriety, just being kind of like, oh, this is the new normal. And I don't know whether that's because I'd primed myself through all the reading and listening I'd done in the years before leading up to it. That's why I used to go into the Stop Drinking subreddit so much, because I was a little bit like, I mustn't get blasé here. The Stop Drinking thing was kind of a tactic to avoid myself becoming complacent.
Nice. And it does sound like you built a community. Like Reddit can be a community there that, you know, and I think that's a great tool to share. Save it as your homepage, you know, whatever that community is. And there's so many chats out there that, you know, I think one of the good things that's come out of COVID, dare I say it, is that like the whole recovery platforms, 12-step inclusive, have put everything on Zoom, online. You know, those chats are up, people are vibrantly kind of engaging in that. And I think people are spending more time with themselves, so they can no longer blame it on everyone else in the pub ordering them shots. Like, I'm here alone having a shot party.
Actually, I wrote a piece for Alcohol Change UK last spring, and I put it in there and I thought I was maybe being a bit glib. I thought people might think I was being a bit glib. I was actually completely sincere in it. And that stopping drinking is not easy, but it's really, really simple. And it's basically that don't buy any drinks. And if somebody else buys you a drink, say no.
Right.
It's as simple as that. You just don't put a drink in your hand. And it sounds like I'm being facetious, but it's just, that's what it is. To stop drinking is you just don't go to the bar and buy them. And if someone says, do you want a drink from the bar? You say, I'll have a Pepsi or whatever. You know?
I don't think it sounds glib at all. I think it's one thing that we talk a lot about in recovery circles is the only drink you have to stay away from is the first drink. Because if I don't have the first drink, I won't have the phone call with the dealer hanging around on the edge of Vicky Park, looking for a fucking little scooter to show up and do it. I do not miss that. Like, and especially as a woman, the situations I put myself in to be like, so all right, just popping out, back in a minute.
I guess like the anecdotes you get from those things, it's like you do get in some interesting situations. Part of the difficulty of quitting booze and drugs, I guess, is like you lose that sort of wild abandon. It's quite hard to do that sober. You can do it sober, and this is something I learned. I went to a wedding a year and a half into my sobriety. I was just stood at the edge of the dance floor for about 10 minutes, like, don't really know what to do. Everyone's they're all hammered, and I'm just here like. And then there's just a switch went in my brain of like, well, why don't I? They don't know I'm not drinking. They don't care that I'm not drinking.
Right.
So I just basically, and I ended up being like the life and soul of the party, and this laundry list of men just trying to buy me drinks, and then being like, what? You're not drinking? Because I was just doing knee slides and somersault, I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean? And it was just, there was this, it was just like a switch, this sort of realization that nobody cares. If I'm swinging my arms around and spinning around like a top, they all just think I'm hammered, and nobody's going to kick me off the dance floor after doing a breathalyzer.
100%. And I love it. While I was talking about this with another guest, it was like, literally no one cares. No one gives a shit if you're drinking or not.
I think that's the thing, because we are all the center of our own universe. Right. And so it's very easy to imagine that people are interested in details about what we're doing or thinking, that actually they're just like, I guess the thing is just to look at random people in the room and think, was I thinking about whether or not that person just had a shot or not? Absolutely not. I don't care.
Like, what do you have in your glass? You're like,
and the thing is, like, I've got a few friends who've either got sober or done very extended periods sober after seeing that. I think a lot of people were like, oh, you're a DJ and you got sober, so if you can do it, I'm sure I must be able to do it as like an accountant or whatever. Yeah. And what a lot of them said was that they thought that they'd have to go to work functions and have to drink. And then they'd get there then maybe they'd be a bit like, having a drink. But so long as as soon as the person had a pint in their hand or a gin and tonic or whatever, they were happy because like, all right, fine, you're not drinking tonight. I don't care. I'm still going to have 5 pints.
Right.
And as long as you don't make it weird for them.
So this is what not to do. Sit there and be like, hey, should we talk about your drinking? And we're like, that is one way not to make friends sober.
Yeah, I think the thing is like, so long as someone's not trying to force anything on me, I am totally fine with people. And I guess the other thing is like, you do realize that some people are not particularly interesting drunks. A lot of people become quite repetitive, but it's just, you have to make sure you guide the conversation a little bit more then.
100%. You're like, or just be like, you already fucking said that. Can we,
yeah.
And
that's the thing. Because when people are drunk, it's just like, you blurt things out. And I think you have to learn to remove the filter that you put on your sober self.
Yeah.
Because when you're drunk, you just blurt things out and everyone's like, hey!
Yeah.
Or they don't go away and you just move on and it doesn't matter. Yeah. But you don't care because you were, and so it's just getting used to the idea that I can say this thing and it'll either be great or it won't be, and that doesn't matter. And
like, I'm probably going to remember is the other thing.
That's the only thing, isn't it?
Yeah. Again, nobody cares, sober or not. That's the great thing about being in sober communities or whatever. And you can say stuff and you can feel like a dick, and everyone feels like a dick most of the time. It can be fantastically awkward at times. And, nobody died, literally. So what advice would you give to somebody taking steps towards their sober journey?
Well, I guess the first thing I would say is if you're thinking about it, because a lot of people kind of dance around it for a little while. And so if you are thinking about it, then that probably says that you do need to at least experiment with a little extended period of sobriety. Yeah. The other thing I would say is don't just do a month. A month is great and it's better than nothing. And so if you can only do a month, fine, do that and then just start again. And but really what I found is the real benefits kick in after sort of 6 to 8 weeks. I remember when I mean, this is not necessarily why people should be doing it, but it's something that happened to me. When I quit booze, for the first month or two, nothing much happened in terms of physically. For the subsequent 3 months, I lost 10 kilograms.
Wow.
And like, I wasn't doing any more or less exercise than before. I wasn't eating any more or less food than before. It just basically and nothing much happened for that first 2 months. And then suddenly my belly just disappeared. And obviously that's not going to happen for everyone because I'm a very keen runner and so on. But it hadn't happened for the previous 5 or 10 years of being a keen runner. So that was the thing. But I just think that like, don't beat yourself up. If you do 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and then you have a drink, that's fine. Start again. And I think it's quite a common thing to be like, I've fallen off the wagon. What's even the point? Yeah. But the thing is like, if you look at it as like, well, I would normally have had 30 pints this week. And for the last 8 weeks, I had no pints. And now last night, because it was work due and I felt a bit guilty because the boss was there and I ended up getting drunk and I feel really bad. A lot of people will just get to that point where they're like, so I might as well just get on it for the next month.
Right.
Well, actually, you could just be like, well, I drank this many 100 less pints in the last 2 months than I would have done normally. And now let's get back on that, and, it's a little dress rehearsal.
Beautiful. I think that's such a fabulous piece of advice. Go easy on yourself. And
that's a big thing, I think. It's really, we're very, I don't know if it's just a cultural thing or just a human thing. We tend to be extremely critical of ourselves. And it's like, it's fine to have not quite achieved what you wanted to and start again, or to feel, like a few doubts and stuff, but keep plugging away and my feeling is that if you think that maybe I need to take a break from drink or maybe I need to not drink, then you probably do, because our culture is so built around that thing that to think those thoughts tells you something about where you're at.
Totally. Thank you so much. Well, it's been such a delight to chat to you today. And where can people find you?
So I'm on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook is at DJ Santero. Mixcloud and SoundCloud if you want to listen to any mixes also, and it's just mixcloud.com or soundcloud.com/Santero.
Lush. Amazing. I could talk to you all day about this subject. I really hope we'll be able to revisit it also at some point.
I hope so.
Brilliant to meet you and chat to you. Thank you so much
Rose,
for being on Sober Stories.